Blackwood Relic. Travis Blackwood hurried to finish hooking up the plow to the tractor. Not only would Pa tan his hide if he didn't get the fields done today, but Cassidy was coming over in a few hours, and he didn't have much time to get his chores finished before she arrived. He paused, staring at the forest on the edge of the field. Though the sun was directly overhead, the shadows there were deep and elongated. How was that possible? Even sunlight seemed to fear the trees. Travis had learned quickly not to ask why he struggled breathing, why his hands felt clammy when he was near the forest. Pa refused to talk about anything that concerned the place. He was determined to tame the only field on the property that invited unruly growth, and to force the trees to stay within their bounds. And Travis, standing by the plow here on the edge of the field, should have felt relieved with the shadows so far away. But the air surrounding him was still. Crickets didn't chirp, mosquitoes didn't buzz. The wind never seemed to stir the leaves on this part of the farm. It was as if even the elements and creatures felt there was something to be feared here. Travis shook himself. He'd never finish his chores if he couldn't hold his thoughts together. And if Pa caught him dawdling, he'd whoop him for sure. Too bad the old man was still so much bigger than Travis, who was nearly 18. Travis hadn't caught up with the rest of the family yet, including cousins and even some of the girls. He hopped onto the tractor seat and admired his arms, pretending they had another 10 pounds on them each, like his cousin Justin's. But Cassidy obviously didn't care about that sort of thing. Her beautiful blues were just for him. Throwing the stick into gear, Travis pulled onto the field. Once he settled into the familiar pattern, he was able to daydream, and thoughts of the forest fled his mind. Though he was nervous to introduce Cassidy to the family, scared even, he also couldn't wait. They'd be so surprised that he, scrawny tiny Travis, could get a girl like her. Well, he could. And he had. A sudden bump jolted Travis from his daydreams, and the grinding that followed was rough enough to make his teeth ache. The tractor stopped moving, and the engine whined as it attempted to keep going. Oh no, Travis said, popping the thing out of gear. A cold sweat rushed from his scalp and down his back. Only one thing would stop the plow. The stone. Pa was going to kill him. He jumped from the tractor and rushed around to the side of the plow where the sound had come from. Doggone it, he said, pulling off his hat. He'd run over that rock, and the blades on this side of the plow were ruined, all tangled up around the stone. Why Pa insisted on keeping it there, in the middle of the field, was beyond Travis. And the stupid part of the situation, Pa didn't even know where it had come from, yet he still insisted it stay, and that no one touch it. Well, Travis had had it. It was time to get the thing taken care of. And today was the best time to do it, seeing as how Pa and Ma were out on an all-day date. They always got back late on date night, so Travis would have several hours to dig. He scratched his head. Now to figure out how to get the plow unstuck. He bent and grabbed the twisted metal, prepared to tug as hard as he could. But the moment his hand brushed the rock, all thought fled his mind. His joints froze and his heart stopped beating. A dull ache spread through his body, starting in his chest. He gasped for breath, struggling to regain control, but a sudden terror seized him. He felt someone or something approach. He looked around, barely able to move his head, but didn't see anyone. The pressure became unbearable, and tears sprang to his eyes. What the heck was going on? Moments later, the pressure released, but the feeling that someone was watching remained. The sensation came from all directions, as if the person or being surrounded him. God, he said, looking up at the sky. But the feeling in his heart was far from the warmth Ma always said came from God. Something else was out there. Travis's breath caught. His hands slipped off the metal of the plow, his palms clammy. His heart pounded, making his ribs ache. No, nothing was watching him. That was stupid. Only the plow was there, and plows don't watch humans. They don't watch animals or trees or objects, neither. 'Cause they don't watch nothin', he whispered to himself, wishing his courage would return. He was definitely going to dig up the rock. Travis's phone rang just then, making him jump. He pulled it out of his pocket, nearly dropping it as he fumbled to see who was calling. "Oh, Cass. Man, you scared the bejeebies out of me." "Why? What's going on?" "I feel horrible, and it's freaking me out. It's all on account of this stone here." He dropped his voice, shielding the phone with his hand, hoping that whoever was listening wouldn't hear what he would say next. "And I gotta do something about it. Gotta get rid of it. I'll start as soon as possible, 'cause it's gonna take all day and night." Cassidy made a little pouty sound. "What about our date?" Travis slapped his forehead. "Oh, Cass, I'm sorry. I totally forgot. But there's no way I can go bowling when I know this evil is around. Ma and Pa are gone until 10, so I only have now to do it. Paul gets so mad if he comes home and sees his field dug up. Nope, gotta get rid of the stone now, then make the field right as soon as I can." Cassidy sighed. "Oh well, okay." She paused. "Could I come help?" Something in the forest caught Travis's attention, and he glanced that way. A sigh echoed across the field toward the stone. "Shish," Travis hissed. He crouched down, looking at the trees, trying to see what had made the noise. Nothing happened, but he continued waiting, glaring in the sunlight, trying to ignore the prickly sensation on his skin. Realizing that Cass might think he was a coward if he didn't do something soon, he jumped to his feet and shouted, "Whoever you are, you ain't scaring me." They were, but maybe they wouldn't know he was bluffing. "Trav, you're freaking me out." Travis waited, and when nothing more happened, he passed a hand across his eyes. "It's freaking me out," he muttered. "What did you ask?" "If I could come over." Travis thought it over for a bit. He didn't want to put her in danger, but he could really use her help. "I guess so," he said. "But we have to be careful, and we have to go fast." "Okay. I'm good at digging. Between the two of us, we'll get it taken care of." He couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. He was so lucky she'd decided to date him. "Bring a shovel." "And thanks, Cass. I appreciate it." He ended the call, tucking his phone back into his pocket. Talking to Cassidy always lifted his spirits. It didn't take long, though, for the pressing sensation of being watched to put him out of sorts again. He glanced at the forest as he got back to work. He'd never once set foot in it, on account of them stories. Stories he was sure weren't true, but regardless, he had never wanted to know for sure. It took him almost 2 hours to unstick the plow and get the tractor back to the barn. The job would have been much easier if he'd asked Pa for help the next day, but there was no way he'd do that. Not when it for sure meant Pa would learn what happened. Of course, he'd learn about it eventually. Travis couldn't hide something like that forever. But at least when he did learn, that stone would be long gone, and Pa would be too grateful to finally have a clear field to be mad. Cassidy spent 20 minutes trying to decide what to do with her hair once she'd finished curling it. She couldn't wait to meet Travis's family, and she wanted to make a good impression. Hopefully, the style she chose would last through the digging she and Travis would be doing. After finally deciding to pin up half of it, she grabbed her purse and a shovel and hopped in her car, heading for Travis's place. Cassidy had no idea what stone Travis was talking about, but she didn't care because he was something special, someone she'd wanted to get to know for a long time. And he was cute. His eyes were the perfect shade of chocolate brown, a beautiful contrast to his wheat-colored hair. She sighed, feeling a stupid grin cross her face. Cassidy pulled up to the farmhouse, admiring its clapboard shutters, blue siding, and white trim. Very cute. The yard was littered with odds and ends, only some of which she recognized, and an old RV sat along the fence that separated the front yard from the pasture. Before she could even get out of the car, Travis appeared at her door, opening it for her. Cassidy smiled up at him as he pulled her to her feet and threw his arms around her, a shovel in his left hand. "Thanks for coming," he whispered in her ear, causing tingles to erupt down her arms. She closed her eyes. Wouldn't miss it. Cassidy knew how grateful and surprised he'd been when she'd said yes the first time he'd asked her out. True, he wasn't as built as her last boyfriend, or most of the guys in school, but he'd always been able to make her laugh, for as long as she'd known him. And he was kind. And his eyes were beautiful. She'd always had a thing for brown eyes. Travis pulled her shovel from the trunk. "Let's get started." He led her past the fence and pasture near the RV, then down a small dirt road by the big faded barn, and finally to a field. "What are you planting?" Travis glanced back at her. "Corn. Like everyone else." She nodded. Made sense. There was a lot of money in corn. They'd almost reached a big stone jutting from the soft soil when a dark feeling dropped over her, originating from the forest just south. The forest seemed to be pulsing, straining its borders. Cassidy shuddered, her eyebrows knitted. Was it like that all the time? She'd never been to their place before. "That always been there?" she asked, staring at the dark and withered trees. Was she imagining them reaching for her? "You mean them trees?" "Long as I can remember." "No, the feeling." Travis squinted at her, a worried expression crossing his face. "What feelin'?" "That they want to eat us." She glanced at him, hoping she didn't sound crazy. Travis swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, and a slight tremor made his hands shake. But then he shrugged and laughed. "Trees don't eat people." "Yeah, I know. Better change the subject." She motioned to the stone. "You sure you want to do this?" "Heck yeah." He handed over her shovel, then began digging, his mouth set in a straight line. "Have you told your parents we're dating yet?" she asked after several minutes of silence. Travis hesitated, his shovel poking into the dirt. "Not yet." "Why not, Trav?" "I guess I'm nervous. I want to avoid the type of reaction your parents had to the news." Cassidy's parents had been furious. They'd forbidden her from dating him. Now that she was 18, though, she made her own choices. Digging her own grave were the ironic words her dad had yelled at her, considering what she and Travis were now doing. But she'd figured it was because they didn't approve of her choice. What would Travis's parents have against her? Daddy was a successful business owner, and it could be said that Travis was dating up. They hadn't been digging long before Cassidy noticed that Travis refused to touch the stone, so she asked him about that. "I accidentally did earlier, and weird things happened." "What sort of weird things?" Travis flushed, making Cassidy even more curious. "Just things." He looked up at her. "It freaked me out. And I'd rather we don't talk about it. Or anything else about the forest." His eyes flicked toward the dark trees. "All right," she said. Something was obviously bothering him. She'd never seen him so uncomfortable. She set her shovel down and stepped up to him, lacing her fingers behind his neck. "What would you like to talk about? Or, is there something you'd rather do than be digging up a stupid rock?" Travis leaned over and kissed her. "Course there is, you vixen. But we gotta get this done, and before my pa finds out. He hates a job that's only part finished." Cassidy sighed. "Can't blame me for trying." Travis looked down, then grinned. "No, I can't. This body is irresistible." Cassidy giggled, wishing they could spend the rest of their time together kissing. But she would do whatever it took to remove that worried look from his face, so she picked up her shovel and got back to work. After another moment or two, Cassidy recognized something. The more of the rock that was uncovered, the more she felt the forest reaching for it. Even the dirt underfoot seemed to shift and move, eager to reveal the stone it had covered for who knew how long. The sensation was disturbing, and brought to mind what standing in a pit full of earthworms might feel like. About 2 hours after they started, they realized the rock wasn't just some ordinary stone. It had weird designs and figures carved all over it. Trying to figure out what the inscriptions were, Cassidy brushed her finger against the surface and felt something flow over her, then shift away, as if she'd been dismissed. She bristled for a moment when Travis suggested that maybe she wasn't as important. To a stone, Cass. And who wants to be important to a stone? She had to agree with that, and rather than argue that stones weren't intelligent and didn't view people as important or not, she continued working. The task grew easier the deeper they dug. The dirt seemed to lighten until it practically rolled away from the rock on its own. But still, she and Travis worked up enough of a sweat for a swarm of gnats to permanently hover nearby. "I hate gnats," Cassidy said. "Gnats?" She pointed to the swarm up above. "They're really coming in now." Travis frowned, staring at the hovering insects. The lines on his forehead deepened, and he bent over, shoveling faster than before. He muttered to himself, quiet enough for Cassidy not to understand what he was saying, but she caught the intent from his tone. Something was wrong here. His unease started rubbing off on her, and more than once, she caught him staring up at the bugs, as if their presence offended and scared him. Why, though? Just as the sun was about to set, they'd uncovered enough to where Travis was sure they could pull the rock up and out. Cassidy leaned against the side of the pit they'd created, grateful to be nearly done. The gnats had multiplied until it was impossible to see more than 5 feet in any direction, and she wanted to leave as soon as they could. "How are we going to move the stone without equipment?" Cassidy said. Travis rubbed the back of his neck. Didn't think that far ahead. He bit his lips. "The tractor. I'll go get the tractor and a bunch of rope, and we'll pull it out that way." "Where are we going to take it after that?" He exhaled in exasperation. "I don't know, okay." Cassidy glanced away, trying not to be hurt by his impatience. He had such a short fuse. But instead of getting on his case, she turned with him to inspect the stone. "Them's not just figurines," Travis whispered. "That's writing on it." Cassidy didn't respond. He stepped forward, following the biggest inscription with his finger hovering over the surface. "Utko Kagger Tuther." He glanced back at Cassidy. "Wonder what language this is." "Sounds like Spanish." She frowned, her eyes on the surrounding gnat swarms that had swooped in closer as he'd read. "And I don't think reading it is a good idea." Travis hesitated, following her gaze to the insects. "Nothing bad ever come from reading, Cass." He cleared his throat. "I suppose we should get going, though." Cassidy rubbed her hands across the sudden goosebumps on her arms. "Yes, please." But Travis gasped, pointing at the stone. A dark liquid bubbled from the inscription he'd just read. "Holy!" He scrambled away until his back bumped against the dirt wall. "There's something definitely wrong with this thing, Cassidy." She whimpered. "Can we go now?" "What are we gonna do with it? We can't just leave it like this." Travis said something else, but Cassidy was no longer paying attention. The liquid had dribbled down to the dirt, and a little creature wriggled out of the ground where the liquid puddled. It crawled toward Travis, leaving a trail behind it. She pointed, trying to find her voice to scream. The creature was a hand, reaching up through the soil. Long, mangled fingers grabbed a hold of Travis's ankle. He shrieked, jerking away, but the hand held on, a wiry arm revealed. "Zombie!" Cassidy shouted. She scrambled away, expecting more of them to come up out of the dirt. Instead, the skin on the hand started bubbling and steaming. The steam had a weird hue to it, a greenish-orange Cassidy had never seen before. She watched with morbid fascination, barely aware of the insects buzzing around them, clogging the air. The steam rose, covering Travis, smothering him. He screamed again, his eyes wild with fear. The gnats thronged him, coating every inch of his body. Cassidy wrung her hands, not sure what to do. His cry ended, and he geared up for another, but the moment he began inhaling, the steam rushed into his mouth, choking him. "Oh no!" Cassidy cried. The buzz of insects surrounding them rose to a fevered pitch. Travis grasped at his throat, gagging. The zombie hand fell limp, and Travis began gurgling, convulsing, foam flowing from his mouth. Finally, he collapsed, unconscious. A sudden silence dropped over the field. Cassidy whimpered again, then cautiously approached. "Trav," she whispered. "Are you okay?" She grabbed his arm, gently shaking it. Dead gnats fell to the dirt and others rose, hovering silently a few feet above. The silence pounded against her. Cassidy started crying. "Travis, wake up." When he still didn't respond, she pulled out her phone, fumbling to wake the screen so she could call 911. But Travis suddenly coughed, spraying foam. He looked around dazed, blinking slowly. He glanced down and saw the zombie hand still attached to his leg. He bent and pried the hand off his ankle. The gnats flitted around him. "Oh my gosh, Travis," Cassidy said, sobbing. "That was horrible. Are you all right?" He didn't respond. He didn't even look at her. She grabbed his arm, nearly falling, unable to control her shaking limbs. "Travis, we have to go." "Shut up, girl," Travis said, finally turning to her. He clamped his hand over her mouth, breathing heavily, pushing her into the stone behind her. "I've waited far too long to be stopped by some imbecile and his whore." The eyes that stared into Cassidy's showed no kindness, no spark she was accustomed to seeing. What was going on? Finally, Travis released her. He wiped foam from his mouth and turned away, waving off the gnats. "Your work is finished." The insects flitted away, leaving the air clear. Cassidy slumped to the ground, jaw slack. How'd he done that? She watched as he stepped up to the stone and rubbed his hand across the surface, eyes closed, a reverent expression on his face. He muttered words Cassidy couldn't understand. She stood, placing a hand softly on his shoulder, not wanting to anger him, but desperately needing to leave before things got even weirder. "Come on, Travis baby. Let's go." Travis ignored her, so she tugged a little harder. "We have to." He whirled on her, and the expression of hatred in his eyes was distracting enough for her not to notice his hand as it flashed through the air and connected sharply with her cheek. Cassidy stumbled backward, unable to see as lights blared across her vision. Tears sprang into her eyes again. Travis would never hit her. Cassidy cradled her cheek, stepping away. Something was very off. She had to get help. As she raced almost blindly away, she heard Travis whispering more words behind her. They rolled smoothly off his tongue, as if he'd said them before. Travis struggled and fought, screaming. His body refused to obey him. Powerless, he watched his hand lash out and slap Cassidy. He cried out, but couldn't hear his voice. "Cassidy," he yelled again, unable to understand why the sounds weren't coming from his mouth. "I didn't do it. I'd never do something like that." She obviously couldn't hear him, and the hurt expression that crossed her face made him ache to comfort her. "Cass." He gasped to himself. Something foreign was in his mind, something capable of thinking. Images flashed before him, until the other entity seemed to realize he noticed. Then the images disappeared. Someone was trying to take over his body. He had to kick the other person out, had to free himself. Get his body back. Travis stretched, pushing with what used to be his arms. They didn't respond. He jumped, struggled, tried to force himself to move. Again, nothing happened. He tried screaming once more. He tried thinking hard against the being in his brain, trying to push it out. Nothing. Travis watched, helpless, as Cassidy stumbled away from him. His mouth was talking, saying things he didn't understand. His hands moved of their own accord, caressing the stone. It began glowing. Suddenly, a faint light shot from the side of the relic, pointing into the forest, and Travis's body crawled up the side of the hole, following the stream of light. Travis screamed, thrashed even more. No way in heck was he going into that creepy forest. Realizing his efforts weren't getting him anywhere, he changed tactics. "Please, whoever you are, let me go and I won't tell no one what you did." No response, and his body continued following the light stream. It looked to lead deep into the forest, where not even Pa had gone before. Where no one ever went. There were stories about this forest. Legends and myths. People 100 years ago used to do awful things there. Sacrifices. Of virgins. Travis gasped. He was a virgin. Was he about to get sacrificed? Curse his inability to get a girlfriend before Cass. His legs continued forward, climbing over fallen trees, and rather than fight now, Travis was forced to concentrate on keeping himself calm. The panicked feelings, the fear from earlier cascaded over him as he realized that bugs were chirping again, leaves moving. And not only were they moving, but they were reaching for Travis, caressing him as he passed. No, not him, the being that possessed his body. Who was inside of him? Hello. Travis didn't expect a response, and he didn't get one. He wasn't even sure whatever had possessed him was human. That hand had been human, though. It was time to change tactics again. Instead of trying to force the being out, Travis would have to logic his way through the situation. Use reason and smarts against whatever it was that had taken control of him. Unfortunately, smarts had never really been his thing. And Travis was having a hard time ignoring the foliage surrounding him. His body continued forward confidently, and the plants allowed him. Branches moved, fallen trunks lifted themselves. A path was cleared, leading to a petrified tree stump. Travis's hands groped at the tree, and the side of it became mushy. His hand dug into it, he could feel something inside. He struggled once more against the power that held him captive, but control was still beyond his power. His hands pulled out the object. It was a small stone, a replica of the one he and Cassidy had dug up. Travis turned the relic toward the stream of light. His mouth uttered more unfamiliar words. Maybe he wasn't paying attention earlier, or maybe the words this time were more powerful, because the moment they left his lips, he felt a tugging sensation in his belly, and a cold air that made him shiver. There was power behind those words. Power and something ugly. Travis suddenly felt like he'd been rolling in compost all day. A weird, vile smell like rotted vegetables and burning rubber encompassed him, seeming to originate from the stone in his hands. And rather than turning away, the being that possessed him breathed in deeply. "Oh, creators," Travis's lips muttered. He turned and pressed the small stone into the side of the petrified stump. "Return. Return, for your servant awaits." And this time, with a multitude of hands, ready and willing to perform your work. The tugging in his belly grew stronger, and suddenly, Travis felt several more presences in his mind. "We come," the presences whispered. Cassidy ran blindly, stumbling across the field, tears streaming down her cheeks. That look in Travis's eyes, it wasn't him anymore. It couldn't be. She reached the farmhouse and lurched up the steps of the porch, then pounded on the door. No one answered, so she pounded again. The door to the RV behind her opened, and a large woman in a bathrobe, rifle in hand, stepped out. A man appeared behind her, doing up his overalls. The woman peered at Cassidy. "What do you want?" "I'm looking for Travis's parents." "Them's us," the man said. "Who are you?" "Cassidy McKay, Travis's girlfriend." "Oh boy. What was that supposed to mean? We've done something stupid." A panicked expression crossed his face. "Or pregnant?" "What? No. Travis, we dug up the stone." Pa cussed. "That's even worse." Ma nodded, and Cassidy was actually inclined to agree, judging by Travis's situation. A baby, or being possessed by a zombie? Not a tough decision. "Where's my boy?" Ma asked. He's not doing so well," Cassidy said. She quickly explained what happened, ignoring cusses from Pa as he got more frustrated with the situation. "We need to get there now. I don't know what's supposed to happen after that stone gets dug up, but my Pa always said it wouldn't be good." After grabbing a revolver and flashlight, Pa led the way across the field, but Travis wasn't in the hole anymore. Instead, a pale light shone into the forest. Pa gaped. "The forest? We ain't following in there. No boy on the planet is worth it." Ma growled. "Clay, we're going in and you're leading us, or I'll burn the trailer down. That's my baby, and he needs some saving." Pa glared at her. "Fine," he barked before turning around and clambering out of the hole with Ma and Cassidy following. As they headed across the field, Ma put her hand on Cassidy's arm and whispered, "I love that man, but he and his family have always held some really weird beliefs about this here forest." Cassidy glanced at her. "Like what?" "Well, apparently, their kin used to come in and perform rituals. For the gods who created humans." Her tone of voice left no doubt about how she felt concerning all of that. What sorts of rituals? Ma shook her head. He never told me much, but I know it involved sacrifices. She looked at Cassidy, and away again. Of body parts. Not the whole body? Ma shook her head. Most of his ancestors had missing limbs. And toes and fingers. You can see it in the pictures back in the farmhouse. She crossed herself. One of the only blessings of livin' in that trailer instead of the house is not having to look at them pictures all day long. Cassidy tilted her head. They lived in the trailer instead of the perfectly good house only steps away. She couldn't understand that. She was about to reply when Pa held up his hand, shushing them. He peered through the dark trees. At first, Cassidy couldn't see what had caught his attention, but then she noticed that the pale stream of light led into a small clearing, where it connected to a stump with a tiny glowing thing on it. The trees around the clearing were bent toward the stump, shivering almost excitedly. A figure stepped into view, coming around the stump. Travis. Pa laughed. That's only Travis, girl. From what you was sayin', I was expecting Algernon Blackwood herself. But that's the point, there's something wrong with? Pa waved her off and strode into the clearing. Son, we're going home now. He grabbed Travis's arm, pulling him away from the stump. Cassidy's heart nearly stopped when she saw the expression of hatred on Travis's face. Mr. Blackwood, she said, we need... She hesitated when Travis suddenly smiled. All right, father. We may go. It'll be several days before they arrive anyway. He glanced at Ma and Cassidy. But I will be requiring a physical donation from one of you. Call it payment for letting you live on my land for so long. Pa bristled. Our land? Or land? He whacked the back of Travis's head. I have a mind to tan you right now, in front of your girlfriend. Travis glanced at Cassidy. Ah yes. The girl. We'll be having words about you datin' her later. But not tonight. You've upset your ma enough already. He shook a finger in Travis's face. And don't think I'm not furious about you digging up that stone. He and Travis led the way out of the small clearing, arguing about the rock. Cassidy hung back, not wanting to be close to them. She glanced at Ma. It's not him, she whispered. Ma shrugged. He's talking weird, I know, but that don't mean he's been possessed or something. She patted Cassidy's arm. But don't you worry. I'll keep an eagle eye on him. Cassidy was afraid that wouldn't be enough. When they got to the trailer, she couldn't help but ask why they lived there and not in the farmhouse. At first no one answered, and she began stressing that she'd been too forward. Pa shuffled his feet, then put the revolver and flashlight away. Ma watched him. Travis stared at Ma, seeming to want to know as well. Ma finally sighed. Pa got too much stuff in there. He keeps starting them DIYs, do-it-yourself projects, and never finishes. The last one was the kitchen. The sink and stove are out back behind the house. He never installed them again. Oh. Well, okay. After standing around awkwardly, Cassidy finally decided it was time to go home. She knew she'd be back first thing the next morning. With everything that was going on, she'd been surprised to find she was starting to love Travis, and she really didn't want him to be lost forever. Besides, who knew what that body-snatching zombie had in mind? Someone who knew what had happened needed to be on watch. The drive home seemed to take much longer than it should have. The darkness was too dark, the air too still. They pressed against her, even through the doors and windows of the car, making her feel like she was suffocating. Like they were aware of her, and it put her nerves and senses on fire. She felt something approaching, but every time she looked out at the fields surrounding the road, nothing was there. Travis tired real quick of trying to force his visitor away, or to take over his body again. Whomever it was had a grasp that was too tight. Ma had shown Travis's body where he usually slept, above the cab of the RV, when Travis acted like he was too tired to know which way was up. If she suspected anything, she didn't let on. And by that point, Travis was exhausted from trying to get other people to hear him, so he didn't even try. Travis's visitor got ready for bed, then made himself comfortable, and Travis no longer had anything to think about. Boredom quickly set in. At first, he spent the time thinking about Cassidy, how their date should have gone if he'd only left the stupid stone alone. After that, he played his video games in his thoughts before going through the plots of all of his favorite movies. His thoughts returned to Cassidy again, and he was daydreaming about their first kiss when Travis's visitor finally talked to him for the first time. "If you spend one more moment thinking about her, I give you my word, she'll be dead the second I see her again." That got Travis's attention. "Oh, so you're finally talking to me?" Lamentably. "Who are you? What are you doing, and why me?" Travis's body sighed. "My name is Algernon Blackwood. I'm your ancestor, Travis." He sighed again. "I'm shocked at your antagonism toward me, especially after voluntarily allowing me use of your body." Travis sputtered. "I didn't allow nothing. I only wanted to get rid of the darn stone." "You didn't read my journals?" "What journals?" "The ones I left in the attic. Pa said he'd tan me if I ever went up there. And you obeyed." "Have you seen him? He's got 100 pounds on me." Algernon growled. "Wonderful." Then he was silent for a moment. "I expected my posterity to make more of themselves than they have. Especially with all the money I left behind." Travis scoffed. "What money? There ain't never been money in this family, far back as I know." "My point exactly," Algernon said. "It was with the journals. From what I can deduce, someone down the line found it and spent it all, probably on whiskey. Grandpa was a drunk. And no one knew where he got the money for the booze. He died really young, before I was born." "The scoundrel." Travis hesitated. "So, now that you know you're not welcome, how about you leave?" "And miss the arrival of the Agarks?" "Not a chance. I planned for this my whole life." "Who are the Agarks?" Algernon paused. "You'll see when they come." And that was the last thing he would say, regardless of how hard Travis tried to get him to talk. So again, Travis was alone in his thoughts. This time, though, he made sure not to think about Cassidy, but it was hard. He'd never felt so isolated from reality or people in his life, not even after he'd played a new video game for 27 hours straight. After all the lights had been out for a couple of hours, Algernon stirred, then carefully climbed down from the bed. "What are you doing?" Algernon didn't respond. He crept down the hall to Ma and Pa's room and pushed the door open, then stood in the doorway. "I'm serious. What are you doing?" Travis started to get scared. It was a weird experience to feel fear without the typical physical responses that accompanied the emotion. "Please don't hurt them." Algernon ignored him. He stepped farther into the room, then hovered over Ma. He remained motionless, apparently watching her sleep. He waved a hand in front of her face, then did the same thing with Pa. After several minutes, with Travis not daring to say anything, Algernon finally left the room. But instead of returning to his bed, he exited the trailer. "Look, man, I'm not comfortable with you wandering around my property. Where are we going now?" Algernon headed to the farmhouse and carefully opened the door, then stepped inside. Once his eyes had adjusted, he began cussing up a storm. "Yeah, the place is a wreck. I know. It's not just upsetting, it's embarrassing. It's why Ma insists on living in the trailer now." Algernon wandered around slowly, fingering things that must have been there since his time. He eventually made his way up to the attic, where he dug out the large wooden box Travis had been forbidden to touch. He cracked the padlock open with the back of an axe and sifted through the books inside. He froze, then flipped through them quickly, as if searching for something. "We haven't touched the box ever. I swear." Travis wondered if Algernon regretted letting him know he could talk. He definitely didn't seem to want to do it again. Algernon once more dug through the box, pulling out a journal that was a little smaller than the others. He sat back on his heels and flipped through it, using the moon for light. Travis cringed at what he saw in the book. Pictures of half-maimed people, with descriptions of the sacrifices that required the maiming, loss of an eye to grant the donor sight of the dead, a finger removed to help a person win at cards or to encourage more milk from a cow. Practical uses, in other words. But there were also uses with what seemed like little to no relation to the body part being sacrificed. A leg or toe to grant a child a wealthy marriage or to gain favor in the town. Several of the sacrifices came with the promise of receiving magical powers, along with the hope of dwelling with the creators. Popularity contests, basically, but with creatures that were conjured up in Algernon's and the others' imaginations. Algernon continued flipping, and Travis saw that only the first half had images. The last half looked like journal entries. He abruptly shut the book tight at a certain point, glancing around the room as if worried someone had seen what he was looking at. Apparently satisfied that he was still alone, he tucked the journal into his pocket. Then he put the box back where it had been and returned to his bed in the RV. Travis tried to relax, but now he was too wound up. What had Algernon been looking for, and why had he suddenly gotten so jittery at the end? Cassidy knocked on door of the RV, a plate of biscuits in hand. Ma opened the door a crack, then all the way, when she recognized Cassidy. Cassidy followed the larger woman inside, but didn't say anything when she saw Travis playing video games. She slumped onto the couch in relief. He couldn't possibly be possessed anymore. No one but Travis could tolerate the games he'd told her he played. "Hey, Travis baby. I brought some butter biscuits." He ignored her. She rolled her eyes, then curled up next to him, willing to put up with his silly games so long as she had him back. But after watching him play for only a couple minutes, her heart sank. This person had never touched the controls before, it was obvious. She hadn't ever been to Travis's home before, but she knew he loved games a lot. There was no way he'd be this unfamiliar with them. Cassidy stood and asked to speak with Ma alone. Ma led the way down the hall and to the bedroom at the back of the RV. She turned to Cassidy, an expectant expression on her face. "I just wanted to know what's going on with the stone." Ma shrugged. "Pa went out to bury it hours ago. He should be coming along any minute." She glanced at a clock on the wall. "I'm heading to the store now. You're welcome to come along, if you like." Cassidy declined the offer, instead heading out to the field to find Pa. She was a little disappointed that Travis didn't notice she had left, but unsurprised. It wasn't him, she was even more convinced of that now. She realized it was stupid to leave him alone, as they had no idea why he'd been possessed or what the person who possessed him wanted, but she had a feeling this was leading to something much bigger than she could imagine. They needed to get to the bottom of things. And it was looking like she'd have to be the one to do it. It didn't take long for Cassidy to reach the pit. Pa wasn't immediately visible when she arrived. Shouldn't the stone be buried by now? "Mr. Blackwood." She circled the hole, at first hoping to avoid having to go down into it, but when she saw Pa slumped over, unconscious on the other side of the stone, she quickly slid down to him. "Mr. Blackwood." She hesitated before shaking him, realizing he might have been possessed too. But that was a chance she had to take. He stirred when she touched his shoulder, then rolled over, squinting in the sunlight. "Wha?" He put a hand to his head. "How long I been out here?" "A few hours, according to Mrs. Blackwood." "What happened?" "I was trying to bury that dumb rock. Don't remember nothin' after I picked up my shovel." Cassidy nodded. "It doesn't want to be buried." She frowned at it, thinking. Why was it covered up in the first place? "I don't know. My pa always said it needed to be hid from the world 'cause it was unsafe and brought bad things. Them journals in the attic say more. It's too late though to stop." He suddenly jerked backward, scrambling away from the stone. "Because they's comin'," he whispered. "Who's coming?" The ones them sacrifices were performed for. Oh, that's just not true, Mr. Blackwood. Cassidy worked hard to keep her voice from quivering. It's not possible. No one's coming. Pa didn't respond. He allowed Cassidy to help him up and out of the hole, though. Despite her words, Cassidy was freaking out. She couldn't feel her hands or feet, and she was having a hard time not hyperventilating. She could feel presences coming too. She had to stop them. But first, she needed more information. This was a big job to do on her own, but something told her that Travis's parents wouldn't listen to her. They would listen to those journals, though. At least she hoped so. Cassidy returned to the trailer, and once Pa was settled in next to Travis, who was still playing video games and didn't seem to be in a hurry to get anything done, Cassidy headed to the farmhouse. She opened the front door, unsurprised to find the place full of stuff: broken garden decorations, a few toilets, tires, and lots of cinder blocks. She stumbled through the front entry and up to the attic. Cassidy hesitated when she saw fresh footprints and scuff marks in the thick dust coating the floor. Someone had been up there recently. She sneezed, then covered her nose against the dusty air. She hesitated before fully entering. The feeling that permeated the room was slightly familiar, and her thoughts immediately flitted to the stone in the middle of the field. A presence was here, or had been recently. The same one that had flooded over her when she'd brushed the surface of the rock. This room had been guarded nearly as closely as that stone had been. But by whom? The being that now possessed Travis. Cassidy took a step toward the corner where the footprints led. She wiped her sweaty hands on her pants, trying to ignore the prickly sensation on the back of her neck. Regardless of how she felt, no one watched her now, she was sure of it. But how long would Travis's possessor stay away? Would he suspect her of wanting to find and read the journals? She'd better hurry. After digging through several cardboard boxes, she found a wooden box full of leather journals. They were stained and smelly, and she cringed just touching them, hoping those dark marks weren't caused by blood. She leaned back on her heels, starting with the earliest dated book and scanning through it and the other journals until the stone was first mentioned. The journals were written by a man named Algernon Blackwood, Travis's ancestor. He was a professor at Caton University when it was first founded. Cassidy had never heard of Caton University, but it seemed that Algernon taught about myths and legends of supreme beings who claimed to have created humans. He'd become infatuated with these beings, especially when he learned that at one point they'd planned to grant magical abilities to humans. During his studies, Algernon uncovered rumors of an ancient relic that would call the creators, also known as Agarks, back to Earth. He immediately struck out to find it, eventually succeeding, to everyone's surprise, and brought it home. Algernon claimed he'd been chosen, to guard the stone and protect it. He was disappointed to learn that the stone could only be used once every 500 years. 150 years remained until the next opening would arrive. Rather than allowing one of his posterity the opportunity to call back the Agarks, Algernon became obsessed with being the last protector the stone would ever need. A permanent guard. Cassidy could see from his journal entries that he slowly went mad, a thirst for power, prestige, and magic nearly overtaking him. She was sickened when he started suspecting his family of jealousies and began writing of ways to keep them away permanently. Cassidy perked up when he mentioned a book of spells as having something in it that would help him stay with the stone until the 150 years had ended. Maybe the book would have other spells in it, like one that would get rid of whatever possessed Travis. After a while, the madness took over, and he wrote about how he'd killed his entire family, except for his oldest son who was away at college. The next entry was his last. The final step is about to take place, wherein I shall bind my flesh and bones to the soil surrounding the relic, and my soul to the relic itself. Alfred, my eldest, please don't hate me for the things I've done. As you read through these journals, you'll come to understand the importance of my mission and why I had to be the one to fulfill it. I leave you with a command to forever guard the relic, and a command that your children do the same. Read the Book of Enchantments. Memorize it. When the time is right, one of our descendants will use it to unlock my spell, and allow my spirit to inhabit his body, so that I may call the Agarks. What an honor and a blessed situation for that individual. To be the vessel of my soul, a servant of the creators. Cassidy looked up from the journal, sickened by Algernon's wickedness. She couldn't believe he'd killed nearly his entire family. And he thought it would be an honor for him to possess a person's body. Ridiculous. And poor Travis. To be the lucky one. Needing answers, Cassidy quickly scanned through the first section of the journal, hoping to find something that would bring Travis back. Nothing was there. She started digging through all of the boxes, trying to find the book Algernon had mentioned, the one with the instructions in it. Cassidy didn't find it or anything else written by Algernon, but she did find a few journals written by Alfred, his son. "Man, what's with these people and journals?" she whispered, opening up the first book. Alfred's writing style was similar to Algernon's, and Cassidy found that scanning through the pages was an easy task. At first, she was hesitant, steeling herself for a personality like Algernon's. But Alfred was kind-hearted and a hard worker. He immediately brought up the situation with his father, touching on the pain Algernon's actions brought him before showing everything he did to try to rectify the situation. First, he buried the Book of Enchantments in the forest. He gave instructions on how to find it if the need ever arose, but warned against seeking it to satisfy curiosity. Only for the worst situation imaginable, that his father had possessed the body of a descendant, should it be recovered. Cassidy snorted. Check. She took a picture of the instructions with her phone, then continued reading. Second, Alfred had buried the relic in a separate part of the forest. This task was apparently very difficult, because the relic didn't want to be covered. "As poor Mr. Blackwood discovered today," Cassidy whispered. She wondered at what point of the farm's history the forest surrounding the buried relic had been pushed back. The third thing ended up being a failure. Alfred tried to find the stone's replica to destroy, as it was the final piece in calling the creators. Cassidy frowned when she read that part. Algernon's journals hadn't said anything about a replica. How had Alfred learned of it? He must have had access to other writings of his father. Something dashed across the floor of the attic, making Cassidy jump. A mouse. She put a hand over her heart, breathing deeply, trying to calm herself. It felt like the oxygen had all been sucked from the room, replaced by a scratchy wool blanket that covered Cassidy, suffocating her. Not wanting to spend another moment in the attic, she jumped to her feet and dashed down the stairs. Then Cassidy headed toward the forest. Travis wished he could yawn, but his body apparently wasn't tired. He never thought it was possible to get bored of every single video game he owned, but his visitor had somehow managed to get Travis there. And why did Algernon play the dumb games anyway? Pa stormed from his room at the back of the trailer. Travis knew it was him because of the heavy boots Pa always wore. Algernon, of course, didn't turn to see. "Travis, get off that skinny butt of yours and get outside and do your chores. I'm sick of seeing you wasting the day away." Algernon started. "Chores? Excuse me?" "Yes. The cows still need milking. I did it for you last night, don't make me do it again." Algernon put down the video game controller and folded his arms. "I do not do chores." Pa's mouth dropped, and Travis couldn't blame him. He hadn't contradicted Pa like that in years. Pa recovered quickly. "Do I have to make you, boy?" Algernon stood, hands balled into fists. "How? What could you do to me?" Pa again looked shocked. Then he drew himself up to his full 6 feet, 4 inches, towering over Travis, who was several inches under 6 feet. Travis panicked. "Algernon, buddy? He's got 100 pounds on you. Look at yourself. There's no way this body would win against him." Algernon looked down, seemingly shocked to see someone else's form there. He was smart enough to recognize reason, and he wavered, not meeting Pa's eyes. "What do you want me to do?" Our chores boy. Algernon nodded, then stepped out of the trailer. Travis expected him to ask for help, but he didn't. Since it was Travis's body that would receive the punishment, though, Travis gave Algernon the information anyway, teaching him how to gather eggs and milk the cows. "You know, I don't get something," Travis said. "Why are you okay with pretending to play video games, and yet chores are beneath you?" Algernon didn't respond, and Travis didn't expect him to. He fell into a stupor, watching his ancestor gather eggs. He wished Cassidy could talk to him, could see him and know he was still there. He was lonely, but on the other hand, and for the first time in his life, Travis didn't mind doing chores. He wasn't really doing them, anyway. Cassidy headed to the barn to get a shovel, but ran into Ma, who was standing outside the door, staring in with a confused expression on her face. Cassidy hesitated. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Ma shook her head. "I'm beginning to agree with your assumption that he's not quite in control of herself." Cassidy looked into the barn, following Ma's gaze to the other side of the large building, where Travis sat on a stool, swearing at the cow he was trying to milk. "Looks like he's having troubles." "Troubles? He done forgot how to milk the cows. She's kicked him once and stepped on him twice. Travis ain't had problems with them cows in years." Ma looked at Cassidy, tears in her eyes. "Help me get my baby back." "I will. Watch him, and make sure he doesn't do anything dangerous. There's no telling what he's capable of. I'll be back fast as I can." Cassidy crept into the barn and pulled a shovel from where it hung on the wall. She breathed a sigh of relief when Travis didn't notice her. She ran to the forest, energized and feeling optimistic now that someone was on her side. 2 against Algernon still wasn't good, but it was better than just 1. Before she reached the trees, Cassidy pulled out her phone, opening the picture she'd taken earlier of Alfred's instructions. It occurred to her that Ma wouldn't have minded if she'd borrowed the journal, but who knew what Pa would have said if he'd found out. The instructions talked about many landmarks she'd need to follow to find where the book was buried. She paused before entering the forest, staring at the dark trees that seemed to forbid sunlight from entering. The moment she stepped into the forest, she could tell she wasn't wanted there. The heavy branches loomed over her, and the undergrowth tripped her, making it impossible to tell where to place her feet. More than once, she got snagged in brambles and had to break her way through. If the physical difficulty of finding the burial site was the only thing she had to deal with, it wouldn't have been so bad. But the feelings that assailed her were especially upsetting. More than once, she swore she saw someone watching her, but when she turned to look, no one was there. She couldn't tell if whomever it was that watched was friendly or not, but it didn't matter. The feeling of several pairs of eyes on her was enough to make her nearly cry with joy when she finally found the huge moldy boulder Alfred described. Cassidy tucked her phone into her pocket, then jammed the shovel into the soil. An abrupt silence fell over the forest, and the wind stopped playing through the leaves. Something gently caressed Cassidy's cheek. She jumped, turning to defend herself. But no one was there, and still nothing moved, not even the branches. Her breath hitching in her throat, Cassidy began digging in earnest, trying to ignore the pressing sensations that flooded her. Were the spirits she saw, from the corner of her eyes, the victims of the sacrifices that had been performed? "I'm here to help," she whispered, taking a chance that those who watched wanted to be helped. She knew not to expect an answer, but was still disappointed when one didn't come. The deeper she dug, the more she felt like she would suffocate from the silence. This book was dangerous. And so was the forest. About an hour after starting, the shovel clunked against metal, and Cassidy dropped to her knees, pulling the rest of the moist soil away with her hands. Once enough dirt had been moved, the wooden box was visible, its metal clasp almost completely rusted away. She lifted the box, setting it on top of the mound of fresh soil. Cassidy pried at the lock. It didn't give. She whacked it several times with the shovel. The old metal finally broke enough for her to open the lid, revealing the leather book inside. The cover was rotted, the words engraved on it almost impossible to read. She picked up the book, nearly dropping it, disgusted by the slimy texture of the leather. She turned the cover, then gasped. The book was in tatters. Had the spell been destroyed? She looked at her phone, reading in Alfred's description that the spell was about halfway through the book. She carefully turned the moist pages, grateful that later pages were in better condition than earlier ones. Finally, she found it. A large portion of the writing on one page had bled from the humidity of the soil, but she couldn't read that section anyway. It was written in the same Spanish-like language she and Travis had encountered before. The other side was apparently a translation into English. Cassidy scanned the instructions. The recipe called for a locket of hair from someone not related to Algernon, a fingernail, blood, and bone shavings from Algernon's corpse. She'd have to make a poultice of the stuff, tie Travis to the stone, then press the poultice between him and the stone. It would supposedly force Algernon's spirit to leave Travis and re-enter the stone. Algernon had been dead for ages. Did his bones even exist anymore? She really didn't want to have to dig around for them. The spell on the next page was obviously the one Algernon had used to get himself in this position. It was nearly the same as the one Cassidy would be working with, but instead of bone, he had to use shavings from the stone. And like the other one, he had to tie himself to the stone and put the poultice between himself and the thing. Judging by where his hand had come up from the ground, he must have died, tied to the stone, long after the poultice had fallen. What a horrible way to go. Cassidy took a picture of the spell, then returned the book to the box, covering them with dirt. Algernon wouldn't know that she had the antidote on her phone, but if he spotted that book, he'd immediately be suspicious. When something again caressed her cheek, Cassidy picked up the shovel and ran back the way she'd come as fast as she could, only tripping a couple of times. The moment she cleared the trees, she dropped the shovel and bent over, breathing heavily. She'd never go back into that forest again, if she could help it. Cassidy headed toward the barn. When she neared, Pa and Travis were yelling at each other just outside the door. She approached cautiously and replaced the shovel, relieved they didn't notice her. Mom must have seen her from a window because she came out of the trailer and stood next to Cassidy, staring at her husband and son, arms folded. "What's going on?" Cassidy asked. Pa wanted Travis to finish plowing that stupid field, and whoever it is that possessed the boy blew the tranny on the tractor. She sighed, glancing at Cassidy. "What did you find?" "The remedy." Cassidy couldn't help but smile, in relief. "But I'll need help." Ma looked over Cassidy's shoulder at the men before inviting Cassidy inside. "It's just you and me, girl. I tried talking to Pa. He didn't believe me." Cassidy nodded. She was grateful to at least have Ma's help. The two women sat at the table, and Cassidy opened up the picture of the recipe. "We need bone, blood, a fingernail, and a locket of hair." "Does it say what kind of bone?" "It has to come from Algernon's corpse." Ma raised an eyebrow. "Algernon." Cassidy nodded. "He's the one who possessed Travis. He's Travis's ancestor." Ma frowned. "About Travis. We need to discuss you two, Datton. I hate to hurt your feelings, but it's just not a good idea." She flushed. "I mean, I don't think ya mesh well." Cassidy rolled her eyes. "If it's because of my dad and his business, I don't want to talk about it. In fact, I don't want to talk about anything at all except Travis's current situation. Once we get him figured out, we can discuss other things." "Okay." Ma bit her lips, obviously still concerned. But she relented. "I suppose you can't go kissing him now, can ya?" She motioned to the phone. "Where are we supposed to get the fingernail from?" "It doesn't say." Ma pressed her hands against her eyes, slumping over, obviously feeling the stress of the situation. "What's going on, and why is it happening now?" Cassidy filled Ma in on what she'd read in the journals, realizing Ma probably hadn't read them herself. She didn't enjoy the expressions of shock that crossed the woman's face. "I married into a monstrous family. No, I'm willing to bet Algernon is normal for the area." Cassidy flicked her gaze to Ma. When Travis and I started dating, he told me about these weird rituals that used to get performed by the townsfolk. Ma nodded. Yeah, they quit shortly before Rob and I got married. She took a deep breath. Let's get to work. She looked at her manicured hands. I don't have much use for these anymore. Time to donate one to my little boy. Before Cassidy could ready herself, Ma ripped off half of one of her long nails. She didn't make a sound, even though Cassidy was positive it hurt like the dickens. Cassidy jumped to her feet, grabbing some paper towels for Ma to hold against the bleeding nail bed. Then she rummaged through the cupboards until she found a glass bowl for them to put the ingredients in. As she was the only one not related to Travis, Cassidy snipped off a lock of hair with scissors she found in the bathroom, adding it to the bowl. Then she returned to the kitchen area and held the bowl out to Ma. Drip some of that blood in it. It's not going to be enough, I don't think. The recipe doesn't say how much we need. Ma shrugged. It says to make a poultice. A poultice ain't gonna come from just a couple drops of blood. Okay. Cassidy pulled a knife from a drawer, prepared to cut her palm, but Ma stopped her. Does it have to come from a person? Cassidy shook her head. I don't know, it didn't mention anything specific. Then we're not using your blood. There's some raw hamburger in the fridge. We can use that. Cassidy bit her lips. I hope it works. If it don't, we can take blood from you. But it's worth a try first. Cassidy didn't want to say it, but she agreed. The thought of cutting herself made her stomach curdle. She removed the wrapping from the hamburger and poured about 2 tablespoons of blood into the bowl. Cassidy returned the beef. Now the bone. Ma nodded. That's gonna be hard. We'll have to dig it up. Just then, the door swung open and Travis and Pa entered the trailer. Travis's gaze landed immediately on the bowl. What you got there? Pa asked. Ma slid the bowl out of sight. Nothing, honey? Pa grunted. What's for dinner? We're starved. Cassidy felt Travis's eyes on her, but she refused to look at him. With Ma now rummaging through the cupboards, Cassidy knew getting Algernon's bone was up to her. Well, I'd better be going now. Gotta get back home. So soon? Algernon asked. Cassidy finally glanced at him. His eyebrows were drawn together, and an expression of distrust was on his face. It caused prickles of fear to stab her in the stomach. Did he suspect she was up to something? He had to, he'd seen the bowl. Yeah. I need to get some homework done. Pa tilted his head. School don't start for several more weeks. Ma elbowed him. Cassidy's in summer school. Ain't that right, sweetie? Yeah, that's right. Feeling Algernon's gaze on her, Cassidy picked up her purse that was still on the couch where she'd left it earlier, slipped her phone into it, then exited the trailer, glancing at Ma one more time. The bowl was completely out of sight. Hopefully, Ma would be able to keep it away from Algernon while Cassidy went digging. She planned to do that right away, but Algernon decided to escort her out to the car. He held the door for her. Sorry I've been so distant today, darling? Cassidy tried to smile. It's fine, everyone has off days. What were you doing with Ma while I was milking the cows? Oh, having girl talk. Really? His tone of voice made it clear he didn't believe her. Algernon's hand suddenly whipped out and grabbed her wrist. You're not planning something stupid, are you? Oh, babe, what sort of thing could I possibly be planning? Cassidy hoped her bright tone of voice would hide her fear. Are we still on for tomorrow night? Their date was supposed to have been last night, but hopefully, Algernon didn't have access to Travis's memories. Hopefully Travis was still there, inside him. I'll be looking forward to it. He finally released her, stepping back from the car. Cassidy hopped inside, slamming the door, barely breathing as she drove away. She couldn't help but look at him through the rearview mirror. Algernon watched until she pulled out of view. Algernon growled as the car disappeared around a bend. Your girlfriend is up to something. Travis breathed a sigh of relief. If Algernon was addressing him directly again, maybe Travis could convince him to leave Cass alone. I doubt that. She's really behind in school and has stuff she needs to do. I didn't miss the bowl on the table, but perhaps you did. There was blood in it. And hair. Travis had no idea what the significance of that was. So. Algernon snorted, turning back to the trailer. Boy, you must not have had a brain in your head before I got here. He laughed lightly. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your body. And your little girlfriend. Travis refused to respond. Doing so might anger Algernon into following through with the threat. Algernon entered the RV and sat next to Pa, who was watching football. Ma wasn't in sight. Travis hoped Cassidy wouldn't return that night. Even if she was coming up with something to help him get rid of his visitor, it wasn't worth her getting hurt or killed in the process. Rather than driving home, Cassidy headed straight to a nearby hardware store and bought a shovel. She didn't want to waste the extra 20 minutes it would take to get to her side of town and the shovel she'd used the night before. She returned to the Blackwoods farm and pulled onto a small dirt road that divided the forest from the field. Cassidy dumped the contents of her purse on the seat of the car. She'd need a place to put the bone once she dug it up. Then, shovel in one hand and purse in the other, she walked across the field to the hole. She found the place where Algernon's hand had shot up from the ground, but the hand wasn't there anymore. Had it pulled itself back into the dirt? Cringing when she thought about the shovel hitting the old man's rotted flesh, she dug slowly at first. And found nothing. Maybe Algernon had come out here and removed his body. She kept going, digging faster. Her arms ached from the work she'd done the night before, and her hands were on fire, new blisters erupting on the tender skin. Finally, the shovel hit something that wasn't dirt, something that didn't have as much give. No longer caring what she might touch, Cassidy dropped to the ground and scooped away the excess dirt, revealing a skull. Algernon's skull. The smile gaped at her, teeth missing, eyes empty and dark. No flesh remained, except for a patch on the head where some hair was still attached. How had it survived the many years since Algernon's death? Cassidy picked up the skull, nearly heaving. She'd never touched human bone in her life. Sure, she'd seen skeletons plenty on TV and in movies, but actually touching a part of it, something that had been inside a person, full of matter and brain, made her stomach roil. She placed the skull in her purse and stood. Well, now that you've found my body, perhaps we can do a proper burial. Cassidy gasped, nearly falling into the hole she'd just dug. Algernon grinned down at her, his mouth reflecting the smile the skull had given her earlier. He offered a hand. Allow me. Cassidy backed away, hitting the relic. She tried to ignore the sensations touching the stone brought, but with Algernon there, it was difficult. Unseen eyes pressed in on her from all sides, and the feeling of something big coming nearly overwhelmed her with fear. She took a deep breath, trying to clear her mind. I'll stay here, thank you. For how long? Until the Agarks arrive. Algernon glanced up at the sky, an expression of wonder on his face. Then his eyes narrowed and he looked down at her. I can't allow you to continue with your plans. Oh? Cassidy tried to control the quiver in her voice. What plans? Algernon barked out a short laugh. Stop playing games, girl. He suddenly jumped into the pit, landing next to her. Before she could react, he backhanded her. Cassidy's head flipped to the side, her body following. She slammed into the dirt several feet away, her vision fading before she tried to push herself up. A sharp pain radiated through her jaw and head. Her hand sought for her purse, but she dropped it. Ignoring the deep ache, Cassidy scrambled to her knees, holding her temple with one hand, trying to reach her purse before Algernon did. He was faster. Algernon pulled out the skull, holding it, an expression of awe on his face. How often can an individual say they've held their own skull? A shadow fell over him. Pa and Ma had arrived, Pa with a rifle pointed at Algernon, and Ma behind him holding the bowl in one hand and a rope in the other. Cassidy gasped when she looked more closely at Pa's face. Purple bruises were blossoming across one eye, and his cheekbone sported a fresh cut. He cocked the rifle. "Drop it." Algernon raised an eyebrow. "You kill me, you'll be killing your son." Ma whimpered, mirroring Cassidy's feelings, but Pa didn't waver. "I never had much use for possessed family members anyways." He kept the rifle trained on Algernon. "And I'm positive, if I blow them brains away, you ain't coming back a second time." Algernon nodded. "You have a point." He didn't put down the skull. "How about we talk through this? Even if you kill me, the creators will still be coming. What will you do when they arrive?" "They ain't gonna come." Algernon snorted. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. 'Cause you're gonna tell them you've changed your mind." "I'll die before I do something so ridiculous." Algernon pulled a knife from his pocket, holding it to his own throat. Pa scowled. "That don't work, you idiot. I got a gun on you. You can't hold a knife to yourself. It don't work that way." Algernon's gaze flicked away. "Yes, I see the irony in the situation. Regardless, I'll not be asking them to change their minds." "And I'm not going to change my mind about you," Pa said. "You ruined my tractor and upset Ma cows." Just then, Ma touched Cassidy on the back. Cassidy nearly screamed before realizing who it was. How had the woman gotten around the hole without anyone noticing? Ma held the bowl in her hands and motioned to the pit where Cassidy had pulled the skull from. "There are more bones in there," she whispered. "Let's find out." Cassidy turned to start digging, but Ma put a hand on her arm. "Or hurt. Watch them, men, and keep Algernon's attention off me. I'll get it." Cassidy nodded, trying to think through the pain that still reverberated in her head. Ma dropped to her knees, pulling out dirt. Cassidy was grateful when not once did Algernon glance Ma's way. He continued arguing with Pa, holding the knife in one hand and the skull in the other. Moments after she started, Ma finished and Cassidy helped her to her feet, a bone from Algernon's spine in her hand. Ma pulled a razor from her pocket and shaved several flakes of it into the bowl. Then, using the other end of the razor, she mixed everything together. The poultice now ready, Cassidy and Ma turned to the heated conversation the men were still having. Pa had come into the hole, and they were now fighting about the eggs Algernon had dropped while in the co-op. Ma pulled the rope from her shoulder, unwinding it. She handed one end to Cassidy, motioning to Algernon. But right as the women jumped for him, he lunged at Pa with the knife. Pa's gun went off. Algernon spun from the impact, slamming into the rock. "My shoulder!" he screamed, holding it with his hand. Cassidy and Ma froze, then rushed to him. Travis had been shot. "Travis, baby," Cassidy said, holding his cheek, "are you okay?" "What are you doing, girl?" Ma shouted. "Tie him up." Cassidy nodded, biting back her sobs. Tears flooded down her cheeks, making it difficult to see. At least he was alive. Pa dropped his gun and helped. Pretty soon, Algernon was completely immobilized. Ma retrieved the bowl and approached. "I want my son back." She glanced at Cassidy. "How's this supposed to work?" "Put the poultice between him and the relic," Cassidy said. Ma smeared it between him and the rock, then stepped back. Nothing happened. "What's wrong?" Pa asked. "I don't know," Cassidy said. "You missed something," Algernon said, his dark expression lightening. Cassidy shook her head. "No, we didn't." She pulled up the recipe on her phone. "We did everything it said, created a poultice made from a fingernail, blood, bone from Algernon's body, and hair from someone not related." Pa swore and Ma's face blanched. "What was that last thing?" Ma asked. Cassidy hesitated. "Hair? From a non-family member." "Where did you get the hair?" Cassidy lifted her hand to her head. "Me." Ma groaned. "Oh no." Pa cussed again. "I told you we'd never get past this." Algernon started laughing. "The girl is family, isn't she?" Cassidy started. "No, I'm not." She glared at Algernon. You're a horrible person to say something like that. Stop trying to manipulate us with your lies. Cassidy, sweetie, Ma said, her eyes filling with tears. Why wasn't she arguing with Algernon? Come on, Mrs. Blackwood. Tell him. Ma shook her head. Your pa. Cassidy's heart nearly stopped beating. What are you saying? Your pa and I. Cassidy's hands fluttered to her mouth. No. No. She looked at Travis and backed away. I don't believe it. There ain't nothing to believe, Pa said. Jesse stepped out on me, and Travis came along. He held out his hand, motioning for Cassidy to give him her phone. Here, we'll do the recipe again. If it works with my hair, you'll know we're telling the truth. Cassidy handed over the phone, hands shaking. This wasn't possible. She'd kissed Travis how many times? And why hadn't her dad told her when she mentioned they were dating? Her stomach fluttered, the nausea from earlier returning. He'd tried. He'd said he needed to talk to her, tell her about mistakes people make when they're placed in compromising situations. She thought he'd been trying to tell her about the birds and the bees. Oh gosh, Cassidy said, sinking to the ground, hands on her mouth, unable to think as she watched Ma and Pa rushing around, gathering new ingredients. Ma donated another fingernail. Pa gathered blood from the place on Travis's shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. He yanked hair from his own head and added it to the bowl while Ma put in more bone shavings. Then Ma placed the poultice between Travis and the relic. This time, they knew immediately that the recipe had been followed correctly. The stone glowed brilliantly, and Travis slumped, steam billowing from his mouth, eyes, ears, and nose. The steam dissipated. Travis gasped, looking around himself. Ma? Pa? Then he looked at Cassidy. Oh, Cass, he whispered. Cassidy started crying. 2 days later, Pa let Travis dump the last of the dirt onto the relic. His shoulder stung with even that much motion, and he leaned against his shovel, catching his breath. He hadn't seen Cassidy since the other night. He hoped she was okay. Travis couldn't believe she was his half-sister. He refused to think about all the times they'd held hands and kissed. Why neither set of parents had told them anything was beyond him. That should do it, Pa said. And we'll let the irrigation water flood the field, put a nice pond here instead of corn. And like I already said, Ma responded, we should have forced Algernon to stop them things from coming. They could arrive at any moment. They ain't comin'. The man was lying about that. Travis turned to Pa, feeling his anger rise with the same argument they'd had multiple times over the past 2 days. And like I said, burying the relic ain't gonna be enough. You know, I felt them comin', heard them talkin' to Algernon. Yeah, well, I think we should have tried destroying the relic again. I could have bought another stick of dynamite. Ma snorted. And what makes you think it would do any better than the first 3? She had a point. The relic was indestructible. And so was its miniature in the forest. The faint beam of light that led from one to the other seemed to be a permanent addition to the farm. I could have gotten my hands on 12 sticks then. Ma scowled at Pa. And we would have said goodbye to our property. Travis tuned out their argument, deciding it was time to go home and deal with his aching heart. Regardless of whether or not some ancient beings, creators, were on their way to Earth, he had to find a new girlfriend. This has been Blackwood Relic by Andrea Pearson. Thank you for listening. Would you like to gain access to exclusive audiobooks only available to members of Andrea's Readers Group? Click the link in the description to learn more.